Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most explosive cultural moments of the 20th century, the British invasion. We're talking about a musical revolution that didn't just top the charts, it completely rewired the DNA of modern music. So, let's dive right in.
It's a pretty wild question when you think about it, right? I mean, in early 1963, British music was barely a blip on the American radar. But just 2 years later, it was a full-blown occupation. This wasn't just a fad, it was a total cultural conquest. So how in the world did that happen? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down. So first up, we're going to set the scene in a pre-invasion America that was just primed for something new. Then we'll see how the Beatles lit the fuse. We'll meet the army of bands that followed right behind them, explore how TV turned them into absolute superstars, and then watch America's musical counterattack before finally looking at the permanent changes this whole invasion left behind.
All right, so picture this. America, the early 60s. Musically, things had become a little, well, safe. The raw, rebellious energy of 1950s rock and roll had been sanded down, and the charts were just filled with this predictable, polished pop. The nation's youth were getting restless. They were hungry for something real. And wow, this slide really lays it all out. On one side of the pond, you've got the American charts, dominated by the Bobby idols, safe, clean-cut pop stars. But over on the other side, something totally different was brewing in these grimy underground clubs. The beat boom. It was raw, it was energetic, and it was completely unknown in the US. I mean, get this, in all of 1963, just one British song managed to sneak onto the American year-end charts. Just one. And then something happened that changed everything. The assassination of President Kennedy created this profound cultural vacuum. The country was just reeling. The youth felt lost, and that clean, bubbly pop music, it just wasn't cutting it anymore. There was this massive cultural hole, and America was desperate for something, anything, with real energy to fill it. And boy, did that energy arrive. It came on a single airplane, February 7th, 1964. The Beatles had landed, and they weren't just another band. They were the spark that was about to ignite a massive cultural explosion. Okay, I want you to just let this number sink in for a second. 73 million people. That's 60% of the entire American television audience, all tuned in at the same time to watch four guys from Liverpool. This wasn't just a TV appearance, it was a national event that literally changed the music industry overnight. And the aftermath? It was just seismic. Take a look at these numbers. British songs on the charts exploded from just 1 to over 36. The foreign music market share skyrocketed from less than 1% to a mind-boggling 55%. But honestly, the biggest change, the real game changer, is right down here at the bottom. The old model of a solo singer performing songs written by other people was suddenly old news. The new model was the self-contained band that wrote and played its own stuff. So you gotta understand, the Beatles didn't just open the door. They blew it off its hinges. And waiting right behind them was a whole army of other bands, ready to charge through. And each one brought a totally different sound, a new weapon in this musical arsenal. And here are the generals of that army. Of course, you have the Beatles, with that polished, perfect pop sound. But then there's the Dave Clark Five, with their heavy, drum-driven Tottenham sound. And get this, they were on Ed Sullivan more times than the Beatles. Can you believe that? Then you have the gritty, blues-drenched sound of the Animals and the raw, distorted aggression of the Kinks, who are about to change everything. Okay, let's zoom in on the Animals for a sec, because what they did was just mind-blowing. They essentially invented a new genre out of thin air. They took this old, traditional folk song, plugged it in, and gave the world what many people call the very first folk rock hit. And here's the crazy part. Here's how they did it. This song just shattered all the rules of 1964 pop music. It was recorded in one raw, messy take. It was almost twice as long as a normal radio single. It had this weird kind of waltzy rhythm, not the typical straight-ahead rock beat you heard everywhere else. And the lead instrument wasn't a guitar. It was this haunting, spooky organ. It sounded like absolutely nothing else on the radio. All right, but if you thought that was revolutionary, let's talk about getting aggressive. Those are the actual words of Dave Davies of the Kinks, and he's not talking about an art project. He's talking about inventing one of the most important sounds in the history of rock and roll.
I mean, this is basically the recipe for inventing hard rock, right here, in 4 simple steps. Dave Davies was so frustrated with how his amp sounded that he literally took a razor blade to the speaker, creating this incredible, fuzzy, angry distortion. And when he hit that simple two-note power chord on You Really Got Me, the DNA of heavy metal and punk rock was born. Right there, in 1964. But that raw, aggressive energy the Kinks had, well, it came with a bit of a self-destruct button. Just as they were taking off, a totally disastrous US tour, full of fistfights and union problems, got them banned from playing in the States for 4 critical years. While their rivals were conquering American TV, the Kinks were stuck at home. It's just a crazy what-if story, and it really shows you how critical that American TV stage was to making it big.
So yeah, the music was the weapon, but TV, that was the missile that delivered it into every living room in America. The visual part of this was absolutely crucial to the invasion's success. It made these bands' faces as famous as their songs.
So Ed Sullivan was the launchpad for sure. But pretty soon this whole ecosystem of new TV shows just exploded onto the scene to feed the frenzy. Shows like ABC's Shindig and NBC's Hullabaloo were made specifically for this new wave of rock music. Shindig even broadcast segments they taped in London, giving American kids a direct pipeline to the whole swinging London scene. All of a sudden, the invasion was on TV every single night. It was inescapable. And you know what came with the music? The look. You couldn't have one without the other. Thanks to TV, the sound and the style were inseparable. We're not just talking about Beatles mop tops and boots. The entire mod look from London, from the short suits to the miniskirts made famous by designer Mary Quant, it became the new uniform for any cool kid in America.
But America wasn't going to take this lying down. See, the invasion was like a creative wake-up call. American musicians, feeling challenged and inspired, started innovating like crazy, fighting back with their own incredible, unique sounds. And you can literally watch the tide turn right here on this chart. That foreign market share takes a nosedive right after its peak in '65. Now, this wasn't because the British bands suddenly got bad. No way. It's because American music got amazing. Bands like the Beach Boys started making these incredibly complex albums to compete with the Beatles, while groups like the Doors came along with a darker, more poetic vibe. The American Renaissance had begun. So, okay, the actual chart dominance might have only lasted a few years, but the impact? Oh, the world was never, ever the same. Let's talk about the lasting legacy of this incredible moment in time. This, to me, is one of the most fascinating parts of the whole story. It's this wild cultural feedback loop. You see, British bands were obsessed with American roots music, rhythm and blues, rock and roll, folk. They took it, put their own spin on it, amped up the energy, and then they sold it back to America, specifically to white suburban kids who, for the most part, had never heard the original Black artists. It was a really complex process, but it ended up helping break down some of the racial barriers in American music. But if you have to boil it all down to one single massive legacy, it's this. The invasion completely torpedoed the idea of what a pop star was. The old model was dead, gone. In its place was the new archetype, the self-contained band, a creative unit, a gang that wrote its own songs, played its own instruments, and treated music not just as entertainment, but as a legitimate art form. That is the world we are all still living in today. And that really leaves us with one final, kind of mind-bending question. Just try to imagine a world without the Beatles' harmonies, without the Animals' folk rock, or without the Kinks' distorted guitar. What would the last 60 years of music even sound like? You can't even picture it, right? And that, right there, that's how you know just how powerful and how permanent the British invasion truly was.